I'm going to be totally honest with you that I came at this from a point of total naivety, and it didn't really enter my head at all. I mean, you can try and research as much as you like, but ultimately, there is dangerous things everywhere. And I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about what I could do to help people, basically. So I really didn't even consider the danger until the first day I ever went into the Calais jungle. And we were driving in, and I thought, oh no, I don't know how I'm going to be able to get out of here in case anything bad happens. And so I guess that was the first moment. I did a variety of different things while I was there. When I first started, I was quality checking tents because after March, there was an eviction of half the camp in March, and they wouldn't allow us to build shelters for people. So we would sneak in equipment to build shelters anyway, but that wasn't allowed. So most of what we would do is we would bring in tents. And so I would have to unpack the tents, check the tents, put up the tents, and pack the tents back down, and then give them to tent team. And then after that, I went on to tent team. And that was one of the most harrowing experiences because you have queues of people, 50 people, they want shelter. They want blankets. They've just arrived. They've got no idea how, like, the ecology of this place works. And there's 6 of us trying to set up tents for 50 people a day, and it's never going to happen. And we had 1.4 miles square to build this place. And eventually you're building tents on top of tents. But with 50 people showing up every day, we went from 7,000 people to 10,000 people in a couple of months, and it was impossible. From there, I moved on to static men's distribution of clothing and youth distribution, and that's when I first started working with the kids. And the thing about clothing is people only donate clothing really when they don't want it, right? So when you've lost a lot of weight, you give that away. You give it to the charity shop. The thing is, that's not necessarily appropriate. I mean, I didn't see many size 36 waists in the jungle. So static distribution was very hard. So static is where you distribute from one place, and they queue up, and they come to you, and you give out. And so I had to develop a way of making sure that the queues didn't go on for so long, but also by giving every single person the time to be able to choose. Because you don't want to just give someone something. You know, like if you had no clothing and I just gave you an outfit and it didn't fit and it wasn't what you liked anyway, but that doesn't matter, it doesn't fit and it doesn't feel comfortable. And that's your only set of clothing. It was my job in just clothing distribution to try and give people a choice, even if it's an illusion. I hope it was an illusion. I hope I did manage to give people a choice. But that's a very difficult thing to do when you have hundreds of people and you only have 100 items of each thing. And during evictions, I was on night shift, taking care of the children who were left behind because they planned the evictions for 7,000 people, no, 10,000 people. So they left behind 1,500 adults and 1,500 children, and then eventually the children were left behind. So it was my role to look after them at night when they were sleeping outside, and these are from age of 8 to 16. And eventually the French government actually sent buses for these kids and they went to CAO centres, and that was positive. And then I took over coordinator for material distribution in the Dunkirk camp, and that's where I did a lot of work. The Dunkirk camp was a smaller camp. It's about an hour's drive from Calais. It doesn't get very much media coverage. There's about 1,200 to 1,500 people there. There were 700 when I started. It swelled to about 1,200 after the jungle closed. So my role there was to provide material aid. So that was clothing, that was wood, that was anything that wasn't food, basically. It was my role to try and provide. So if it's cold, I'll try and get a log burner, or a gas heater. or blankets, or anything. And then when I started at Dunkirk, because there wasn't very much attention on it, it was a struggle because the government are trying to reduce the camp. So it was about trying to bring aid in, but also to delay the eviction of the Dunkirk camp until a plan had been put into place. Because what I had learned from the Calais evictions was that they rushed it and they let 3,000 people suffer because of that. I kind of did it on a whim in terms of first joining, so I didn't really have much of an idea. I just wanted to help out. When I first started, it was like someone had poured a bucket of cold water over me. I felt like my eyes had been opened. And then I went back to England, sat in my job for 2 days, and then advertising. So I get to make adverts and play with cameras and lots of fun stuff. Told Danny Dyer where to go to the toilet once. It was very great. Michael Palin, I helped him get sushi. It was great. So it's very different to what I was doing, but I sat there for 2 days and I'm like, I'm making an advert about toilets. Okay, so I left my job and I went straight back. And yeah, it was like everything had changed. What was beautiful about the jungle, and it was a horrible place, but what was beautiful about it was this tiny little snapshot of what I think everywhere is kind of like. London is kind of like that. You've got the good, you've got the bad, you've got the dangerous, and you've got beautiful things. Like one guy had a garden. I mean, how did he grow in sand? We were on a beach, but he put in the effort, so that was beautiful. Mm-hmm. So they announced that they were going to close the camp in September. And so by the beginning of October, we were kind of dubious about that. They hadn't really made much movement forward. And then suddenly it was announced, and then suddenly it started happening. And there wasn't really a plan, and so it was chaos. The first few days it seemed to go okay. They were registering people. There was lots of confusion, but there wasn't really any violence. And as the days went on and they realized it was going to be more difficult, they started arresting people on the streets, because in France you have to carry around your ID at all times. Now if you are a refugee, you don't have ID, you don't have papers, you don't have a passport. So that was their crutch to start getting people off the streets very quickly. I met this one kid who was, he loved Justin Bieber and Dave Bautista. Two random, those were his favorite idols. And the fact was, he was just sitting outside talking to me about wrestling. And then he's like, right, I'm gonna go to bed. And pulls out his sleeping bag, goes up to the top of a hill and goes to bed. And that's pretty horrible. I would always think that the children would have been our first priority, and they weren't, sadly. But in terms of a heartfelt moment, one night shift, I was sat with a Sudanese boy and an Afghani boy, and they couldn't speak. Well, one spoke Arabic, one spoke Pashto. They couldn't communicate, but the Afghan boy was sleeping outside, and the Sudanese boy had a fingerprint. So he used his fingerprint, got the Afghan boy to sleep inside because it was too cold. And the thing is, it was kind of, the Afghan communities and the Sudanese communities within the jungle were kind of notorious for infighting, fighting amongst each other. And for me, that was great. That was a beautiful moment. It was two kids who didn't have any of this history, who didn't have any reason to dislike each other. And they helped each other out, and they helped each other survive and move on to the next thing.